I mean, I think what I just wanted to do is to really talk a little bit about where the public health community's at and what some of the sort of particular dilemmas are on the ground. I mean, I think we've, for me, there's something about standing back from this and saying, what is it that we know? Where have we got consensus? Where we don't have consensus, why is that? And what are the reasons that we still have people who remain highly sceptical about vaping? And I think one of the best things that we need to be doing is having this sort of dialogue about it. I think one of the things that concerns me, and I know concerns colleagues of mine, is the polarisation that you sometimes get around this debate. People have very strong views on both sides, and sometimes that doesn't always create the best atmosphere to have a really constructive dialogue about where we do go next. So I think forums like this, where we are actually able to air some of this, are really, really hugely important to taking the debate forward. So from a public health perspective, where do we have consensus? I sit on the National Association of Directors of Public Health Policy Advisory Group on smoking, where we play out a lot of these discussions on a fairly routine basis. Can you hear that? Is that better? We know there are 7 million smokers in this country. We know that there are about 2.8 adult vapers in the country at the moment. We know that we have a growing consensus from some significant professional bodies, people like Public Health England, people like Royal College of Physicians, who have now started to come out and say that they recognise that the benefits of vaping far outweigh the known harms of smoking. I think in this is something about where are the points of consensus, and there is clear emerging consensus on some of these, and this is important to allow us to take the debate forward. I think what we also know is that there is a strong consensus that actually using e-cigarettes as a quitting aid is useful, is important. I think that has been very much driven, as colleagues have already said, by a recognition that it is out there, it is happening, it is not something that we control, and we need to therefore get behind that. So I think these are really, really important building blocks for the debate that we know we can work forward on. There are areas that I think are where we still don't yet have consensus, and I think where we need to start moving towards consensus. So, for example, the debate, as we've heard already, the debate around smoking in enclosed public spaces, like here, the debate around smoking in workplaces is still very heated, and there still isn't an emerging consensus there about what we do about that. But I think what we are starting to see coming through is more of a consensus around actually how can we use e-cigarettes in enclosed places, so places like hospitals, places like prisons, places like mental health hospitals, where actually moving towards a smoke-free environment is really, really beneficial, and actually e-cigarettes have huge potential to help with that. And I think what we are starting to see is a bit more of a professional consensus emerging that actually that is a new frontier that we really need to be tackling. And clearly there are many places around the country that are starting to take steps forward in that direction. So why is consensus so difficult? I know that from one side of the debate it can appear a bit barn door obvious that we ought to be doing this. So why are we at such a sticking point? Well, firstly, as many people will be aware, there are some very, very powerful speakers out there in very influential positions of authority who have come out quite publicly against e-cigarettes, and that has an enormous effect on people who, the undecideds really, the people who haven't quite made their mind up. What we also know is that actually for a lot of people, particularly in the medical profession, there is a culture of evidence-based medicine. So people actually want to wait, they want to see scientific evidence emerging, they're not always on top of that. But what they would really rather do is apply the precautionary principle. So can we just wait 20 years and see what happens and see what emerges? And I think although that sounds, in some ways, it sounds a bit foolish to say, well, we'll wait 20 years, the genie's clearly out of the bottle. I think actually we need to recognise that and work with that desire to, in some people's minds, people will think about medical scandals of the past where we thought something was safe and 20 years down the line it turned out not to be. And people still have the spectre of some of those scandals in their minds. I think what we also need to acknowledge is there is a huge distrust of industry out there, and actually what I've heard a lot of colleagues saying is this the tobacco industry time to get their foot back in the door? So I think there is that feeling of, is this another way and is this a new frontier? Actually, is there an economic imperative, a profit imperative behind this? The renormalisation argument we've also heard about, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, is this just going to make smoking normal again, whether it's an e-cigarette or a, old-style cigarette? Is this just a one way of making it look normal again? Gateway effect. So a lot of people early on were certainly arguing, well, people will start with an e-cigarette and they'll move on to real cigarettes. Again, the evidence is coming through that that's really not the case, but I think there are still people for whom that is something of a concern. And I think, as is already pointed out, we do have a real problem with the interpretation of the scientific evidence base out there, not only how things are reported, but actually the quality of some of the scientific studies that are emerging. And I think, again, that does not help to establish a clear debate. So where does that leave us? I think where that leaves us is in a state where we have some leading lights in the field who are really starting to push the boundaries, and Louise has, been an enormous champion of this, often having to push things forward where there is scepticism, where there are people who would really rather hold off and see how things emerge. So I think what we need to see is how we can gradually push those boundaries. I think we need to have more of an open debate about risk tolerance, so accepting that we can't wait 20 years and acknowledging that actually there are huge benefits that outweigh the risks of smoking if we get in there earlier. So how do we get that sort of debate where people will say, we can't say categorically this is 100% safe, but what we do know, it's a lot better than the alternatives. I think the other thing from my perspective, and I know a lot of other colleagues share this view, is it's not all about e-cigarettes. They're one tool in what we have in the kind of armoury that we have to reduce people's dependency on cigarettes. And actually what we need to do is see that becoming part of a much wider toolkit that we have to stop people smoking. Hugely important role that health professionals, as many of you in the room will know, around getting people to quit. And I think we need to see how e-cigarettes play into that. I think locally, some of the other things that we're starting to see is real moral dilemmas around actually what is the role of the state in intervention. Actually, should we just let the market do its thing around this? So I think there are some important issues emerging about actually should the public sector be actively intervening in this, or should we just step back and see what happens? So I think from a public health point of view, I know I've had colleagues who've described this as feeling like it's a bit of a health, it feels like a bit of a wild west out there, a lot of really exciting debates, a lot of heat in there, and actually I think the best thing we can do is to be meeting together with people who have very different range of perspectives to find our way through what is not a cut and dried picture.
Thank you very much.